If you knew me before, you wouldn't even look my way. If I had the nerve to speak, you wouldn't hear what I say. Time has come and gone so fast, we're not who we used to be.
And welcome back to Sullivan's Unheard Voices. I'm here with Al. Al, you came to my attention from Timmer, who I absolutely adore. And he said, you got to listen to this guy play, because not only are you a good drummer, you play this amazing instrument that's the Zendrum, if you will, that's in your lap. And I'm like, oh, I have to know. Like, how did you get started? How did you pick up on this instrument to begin with? Because it's so unique.
Well, first of all, thank you, Timmer, because I respect your playing highly, and you're in like 28 bands. And so thank you for allowing me to even be anywhere near the same 10-foot radius around your stages. So back in my Vancouver, Washington, Camas, Washington days, I decided one day that nobody was going to pay me the way I wanted to be paid for working. So I decided to go into drum teaching, and that worked out pretty well. I had managed to stay one page ahead of my students, each of them, and kept building the student load. And I thought, wow, this is working pretty good. And then parents were always asking me, well, hey, we need drums and equipment, and we don't really know what to get our kids. So I started kind of looking around newspaper ads, because back then it wasn't Craigslist and it wasn't eBay. It was pre-2000. And so I'd scour the newspapers. The Oregonian was the big one for me. And so I'd look under the ads of people selling, big drum sets. And I'd go, hey, I'm not really looking to buy that drum set, but I'm hoping as a teacher to be able to put together some student sets. Do you have any bones laying around of equipment that you're not using? And so, eventually people said yes, and oh, you probably wouldn't want that, but I'd go look at it anyway, and there'd be piles of stuff, and they go, yeah, just give me $50 for that. And while my kids were little, at 10 o'clock at night, once I got my van load of, gear sometimes, and sometimes just a stand or two, I'd go into the garage at 10 o'clock at night and start fixing up equipment and kind of refurbishing it and polishing and rethreading and, fixing up drums. And eventually somebody said, hey, there's this guy that just moved into town from out of state. He's a speaker engineer, and he's got a bunch of extra equipment that he's not using, and he needs some money. So, I went, turns out it was just around the corner from the house. Stopped by there and saw the, $100 pile or whatever it was at the time. But he goes, hey, I got something else to show you. So he takes me over to this other room. It's like anticipation is building. And he opens up this little case. And it was one of these, a Zendrum black in one of the original design forms. And these have been around since the early 90s, by the way, from the company called Zendrum. So you can look them up, .com. Zendrum, all one word. And David, the guy who built it back then, is still building them one at a time, and he is the best customer service man on the planet, bar none. I guarantee he guarantees these things for life. Anyway, back to my first one. He showed me this thing, and I go, that's kind of interesting. And he goes, yeah, it's not for everybody, and maybe somebody that wants to play drums, like this. It's a MIDI trigger is what it is. So I kind of went, interesting. And he gave me the price, and I thought, well, I'm here to buy stuff to kind of move along down the road, but not to, empty out my wallet, right? With the price he had offered. But I thought about it for a couple of days, and I came knocking on his door again. And I said, hey, I thought about that thing. And he also had a little sound module, and those drum geeks out there that know what I'm talking about know the old Alesis D4 rack module, single space rack module. And that was like the go-to module to use when you're looking to trigger sounds with, anything from a keyboard to a other kind of MIDI trigger. So he had that included in the price. Well, I made him an offer. And he goes, oh, man, twist the knife, but I need the money. And so I walked away with this thing, and I kind of looked at it, and I go, what did I just do? But I thought, what the heck, So I started playing around with it. And, it's pretty much like once you understand how to kind of program the buttons where you want them, because it's like tapping on the desk, And, if this is normally your bass drum, or this is normally your bass drum, it can be this your bass drum, not the middle finger though. You can put anything where you want it, right? And then anyway, it's a little bit, it's oversimplified, but you can basically match up the sounds from the module with the unit. And so I did that, and takes the amplification. And so then I started playing with it. And back then there were really no like a lot of play-alongs available like there are these days. These days you can get like tons and tons of play-alongs, -1 kind of thing. And there's even a company in France called karaokeversion.com where for $2.99 they have a highly produced version of just about any song you can think of.
Oh,
all
nice.
the popular ones. And you can either get -1 for $1.99, whatever your instrument -1 is.
Yeah.
Or the custom version, which I choose for $2.99. This is a plug for you guys for free in case you see this. For $2.99, you get a little studio that shows, and you can balance, I want the drums over here, I want the drums off, I want the click in just the first 4 clicks, or I want the click throughout, and you can throw the click on the left side if you're using like in-ears, so you can hear click, 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 and you can hear all the rest of the music in here, and the rest of the music goes out, and then my sound goes out along with it. So at first I started playing with just MIDI tracks, and MIDI is pretty much keyboard stuff programmed. It's very rigid, very stiff, but it still worked, and a lot of people used it, but it was stiff. So if the spirit moves, MIDI doesn't. So you have to kind of be in the box, but it also teaches you good timing and all that kind of stuff. So I started working with some tracks that, Latin is kind of what this instrument is it's not made for just Latin, but because it's percussion, you can throw anything, world percussion on there. I like Latin percussion. And so I started messing around with that. And lo and behold, within 3 weeks, somebody said, hey, that would be cool for our wine tasting.
Yeah.
And so next thing you know, I had a wine tasting room gig,
I love it.
once a month on my Zendrum. So it was basically the paid learning experience. And then eventually I got a keyboard player on it. Hello, Jose Luis, and you know who you are. And anyway, had a lot of fun with it. Then played that for 2-3 years, got a custom one built, which is my second one, and this is my third one. And this is a complete unique layout. And so we're probably gonna have to take a break because I see my battery symbol flashing.
That's fine.
Put a little pause on there so I can put a battery in to demo this thing. But anyway, so that's kind of how the whole thing got started. And I there was times when I wanted to quit and say, that's not for me. And then other times people said, hey, you got to bring that thing. So I go, okay, well, I better hang on to this. So, and then just, gig after gig, or I did a lot of church gigs. And here's the same question that everybody always asks, or here's this exact sequence of what I get to hear every time I play this. First thing is, wow, that thing is really cool. Okay, I knew you were going to say that. And then the next statement, same words from every person. I have never seen one of those before. Got it. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. And the last question is, what is that thing called? And so I used to have a piece of paper down on the ground that had all those answers on there because
I love it.
Like chewing gum and walking at the same time. I may seem okay on this instrument or on this, but like, don't ask me to do too many tasks all at once because I will trip over my shoelaces. So I had the answers right there, and I would just go, right here. And then people still don't know what the heck is happening to them when I'm playing. So I'll give you an example. I've played like multiple voice, choir kind of a thing. And there's like 15 ladies all lined up. We're 3 songs in. And finally one of them, and I'm next to them, right? And one of them chimes in. She goes, you know what? I've been hearing drums the whole time, and I just realized there's no drums. Where are the drums coming from? I go, bam! And she goes, oh! So
I love that.
This thing just tweaks people's brain. Some people think I'm playing everything when I'm playing with tracks. Some people think I'm playing nothing. I had one cute little elderly gentleman come up to me, goes, I know, you're probably really playing none of that, aren't you?
Oh, they're like assuming that you've recorded everything and you're just fake pressing up.
I'm vanillying it. So anyway, I've said enough. Let this man talk.
No, it's all good. One of the things that you said, I do want to circle back with, because like you're talking about like playing with clicks and playing without clicks. One of the things I've always wanted to ask a drummer, because I know a lot of people that aren't drummers or aren't like musically inclined, they don't know what you mean when you say clicks. Can you talk a little bit about what a click is?
You mean a click track? Or,
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's basically a metronome embedded into a song so that you have a reference to be on time. And, and time, as some of you really like industry working day in, day out, working drummers know, their time, it's a very specific thing. It lands on a very specific spot. And so if I call these four fingers time, like the interval when a click happens, like if we were to put it under a microscope, a click is so wide, but there's always dead center on the click, which is the exact moment when the click happens and is subdividing the meter into whatever tempo you're playing. So, and for the advanced player, there's playing ahead of the beat, playing on the beat, or playing behind the beat. And the idea is playing ahead of the beat, it gives a little more elevation to the song, it raises the feel. Playing on, it makes it sound stiff, but some songs require that. And playing behind, like a lot of blues, where the backbeat is like this, it kind of comes after the fact, just ever so slightly, and it holds everything back, and it gives it sort of a relaxed sort of, this sort of mud bath sort of a feel, where you're just like, So anyway, so time in pure form, it's tempo, you're working with something, and you're trying to stay on the meter to where you come back to one together with the music. That's the ideal. And then eventually you disconnect from that umbilical cord of time. I mean, you always work with time some way in your practices, but eventually you get to unplug from it in a live situation, because you may not be getting click on stage. You better have your good meter internalized by that time.
Okay.
So, or the bass player or the guitarist will look at you and go, slow it down. It's rarely speeded up, because we all like to speed things up. We get excited in the drum fills.
I've noticed that too, and so I spend a lot of time with the Nicky Jones band. They're one of my favorites, and one of the things they always talk about is how they rely on a different musician to keep time depending on the song. Mm-hmm. And I always just was fundamentally thought like it's always on the drummer, but depending on the song, it's not always the case, is it?
I just had a discussion about that the other day with somebody, and who happens to be a bass player, and they happen to think that they're the one, sort of in a position along, of course, with the drummer to kind of hold some guitarists back who, get a little excited in their soloing and riffing. But, we're all somehow guilty of that. And the best remedy for that, as almost any pro will tell you, is record yourself, video, audio. And, sometimes, I record just about every show that I've played, and, I'm not an industry player, I'm a hobby player. And therefore my level of that minor detail of time is not anywhere near as polished as the people that have done it all their lives, week in, week out, year in, year out. So I show up with the best of my ability. I do what I can, but I listen back sometimes and I go, oof, it's like, oh man, I was really pushing that. Or, you can compare, like when you start the song and you quickly scrub to the end, and when you're finishing the song and you hope that the tempo, feels about the same.
Yeah.
And, fortunately for me, I don't creep too much, but I do sometimes tend to creep. And, so I try to surround myself whenever I can with great players. And, up here, we're blessed in the Tacoma area, and they're coming from various areas, but they all congregate around here in places like Dawson's, where we have an amazing, amazing typically rock and blues scene. Lynn Sorensen from Bad Company, his cohort Manuel Moraes on guitar. I mean, they're both bass and guitar gods. They know the encyclopedia of music. And I get to stand between them on Thursday nights at a jam session with this instrument as the only drummer in the house, because nobody else knows how to play this except for Chris Candace has strapped it on a couple of times. Hi, Chris. So I get the privilege of having what I call the Juilliard professors of music tube feeding me music from both sides. And, and I get to just kind of absorb all this stuff. And by the time I'm 90, I'll be like scraping at the doorstep of where those guys were 25, 30 years ago. So, but that's my pleasure in this. Again, just hobby for me. And
when you remember when you picked up your first drum set?
Hi, Rick Gast. My friend Rick from my teens, junior high school, had a cheapo Stewart brand sparkle gold snare drum, cheap one, that his mom got him. And eventually he got one of those cheapo cymbals that comes with a starter set. Like if you look at it too hard, it dents and dings and bends and warps and all that stuff. But that's the two pieces he had. And eventually she got him a floor tom. And I'd go over to his house and he'd, when he'd be generous to let me play, because I'd always feed him pastries at my house. So I get to play his drums now. So with the cheap cymbal now, imagine a cheap cymbal sound. That was the bass drum then. And so, eventually my mom caught on to, oh yeah, he likes drums, unfortunately. And then one of her friends schlepped home this probably 1943 vinyl covered, I think it was an old Ludwig set that was half the parts were missing. I mean, it was bad. It wasn't like, some people are thinking, ooh, nice vintage kit. Not. We had to like cobble this thing together and tape it together, and eventually we got a set out of it. And then another friend of mine, and I'm sorry to say, quite underhandedly, got me a set of cymbals. And anyway, that's what I practiced on. Eventually, I had some lessons, but just sparse lessons here and there. And my view of music direction was, oh, I want to do the rock thing, because I was listening to Black Sabbath, Humble Pie, Deep Purple, Grand Funk, who else, all of them out there along those lines. And that's what I wanted to learn. And when I had a teacher eventually that would have been able to teach me jazz and, the good stuff and good technique, I was a little too kind of above that in my own head to want to go sort of backwards. No, I want to do this. Well, little did I know that all the people that are at the top of the food chain in drumming, they're all trained in jazz and orchestral and some military experience. I mean, you got to know your stuff and you got to read. And I never really did learn how to like read. I can fake my way through stuff, but I just never took myself too seriously or beat myself up too hard for what I did or didn't accomplish, because it was always hobby level for me.
And then taking that from approach too, because I think one of the things important for people to know is that it's not like you need $5,000 to get started if you want to start in drums. You can get a kit that you can and kind of start from there, and it's just practice right after that, right? But when you're practicing the drums and you're sort of getting that idea, how do you practice the timing and the difference? Because I always could never, to this day, get my feet and my hands to be at a separate beat. I could never do it. And I always admire drummers that have the ability to be able to do a double bass and have all of these things on their feet simultaneously with all of the, like everything that you got here is like so amazing. How long did it take to develop that ability to do both?
Well, it's still a brick at a time in the piggy bank. I love to use the metaphor, a nickel at a time, and it may not seem much, but you just put a nickel away and you start super basic until it sticks, and eventually it sticks. And if it eventually doesn't stick, you might want to move on to something else because, not everybody's cut out for the same thing. But, if the desire is there, I think it can be done for anybody. I mean, look, there's people, I've seen videos of people playing with their toes because they have no arms for whatever reason, and they figure it out, right?
Yeah.
So you can figure it out. It's how much soul power do you want to put into this thing to make it happen for yourself. Just a little investment at a time, a lot of patience, if it's not coming together right away. And I've had to deal with that with certain students, but eventually they get it. So eventually we all get it. And if you don't, then you just ask yourself, well, is it a true passion, or is it something that, it's just, I can substitute something else in to this slot?
I really appreciate that too, because it's one of those things where, like, the one thing I hear, especially like in the Portland scene now, is that it's kind of hard to find drummers. It's one of those things where, like, I hear from bands all the time, we need a drummer, we need a drummer, we need a drummer. And I just want people to know that, if you get into drumming, there's going to be opportunities for you if you practice and get good enough.
So all the good ones are in bands is what I'm hearing?
Uh-huh.
Not just in one band. They're in like
four
or five of them.
Yeah.
Well, but it's what you got to do these days to stay busy. I mean, I'm hearing that from top people that I have the privilege of knowing and sometimes playing with. And, they're ones that have been on national scenes and international even. And here they are hosting jam sessions, for, I don't know what the dollar amount is. You all know the numbers, but I'm sure it's not what they're really worth.
Yeah.
I mean, none of us are really paid what we're really worth, because think about it. The music industry, the pay system structure hasn't really changed much. 25 years ago, you would get 50, 75 bucks a gig. These days you get 75 to 125 bucks a gig. Is that like, commensurate to, if that's the right word, to industry, like inflation and cost of living?
Not even close.
Heck no.
Not even close.
And, and as a drummer, you're hauling all this stuff around. So you're first one in, last one out. And that's really, like, before I forget the point, this is one of my main reasons I want to play this instrument. It's because my record time, and I've got a video on my Facebook way back there somewhere, is 1:39 minutes from the time I take my four things, which is my stand. I don't have it in here right now, but it's basically a little tripod thing that folds neatly closed and just opens up like that. I put my electronics case on top, and it's got another rack where I can set my Zendrum, and I've got my speaker, and in my Zendrum bag. And from the time I set those down on stage, 1:39 minutes was my record for playing the first note on my drum. So I can be like the vocalist, almost the last one in, first one out, right?
Yeah.
And for any artist that I've worked with that enjoys this or doesn't mind it, I prefer playing this because of the speed. Now, again, and hopefully I'm not getting too far off topic, but there's things that you can do on drums that you can't do on this, but there are definitely things that I can do here that I can't do on drums. So for me, it's a tool. If somebody, goes, don't get that thing near me, I won't be offended even for a moment, as long as they're paying me, and I'll schlep my drums around, and I'm going to have equal amount of fun on the drum set as I will on here. But here it's a challenge, and I like trying to emulate what's happening on the real world drums. And I think in the last probably year and a half, I've made probably the most progress I've made in my whole 20-something years. I don't even know exactly what year the first Zendrum showed up in my life was, but I know I've had them for a long time. And wait until I start practicing.
Was it a hard transition though? Was it difficult to sort of learn? Or was it because you have that fundamentals in drumming that it was sort of easy to transition to?
Well, the rhythms are in your head. You can, if you can say it, you can play it, meaning if you sort of beatbox it or scat it, however you want to put it. Again, with drums, if you do a double stroke roll, well, fingers don't bounce, right? So I'm dead. So this will be in the next segment.
Let's take a pause right now. We'll get you a battery.
All right.
All right. And we're back. Thank you very much.
Sorry about that.
Oh, it's part of music, right? The show must go on.
Anyway, so I was saying double stroke rolls. Well, fingers are soft, and these buttons are actually hard caps, and underneath is a little piezo element that's super thin. It's like a wafer that has 2 layers to it, and the hard cap kind of protects the integrity of the piezo, and underneath the piezo is a hard, like a rubber, but it's still a hard rubber that kind of holds the piezo in place. And then there's a skinny little wire that goes into a circuit board, and there's 1.5 billion wires back here. Anyway, so I won't get too technical on this, but notice how the velocity and the tone changes when I play louder. So these are very sensitive. It also depends on the software that you have, because if the software has, I'm triggering what's called multi-sampled samples, right? So I'm going to give as brief of an explanation for you techno geeks out there. A multi-sample is when you make a recording, a microphone's here, it's going into, some recording system, and you make a recording that starts off like this. And that's your one hit, right? That's a soft hit. So now imagine a drawer or a chest of drawers that has, say, 30 drawers in it, right? So electronically, we're going to store this sound in the first bottom drawer, that sound in the next drawer up, that sound in the next drawer up, that sound in the next drawer, and so on and so forth. And they have ways to scale the hits to where, like most instruments that really have a lot of dynamic range where they sort of blossom the harder you hit them, they need to have their own little place so you can sound accurate or true to the nature of the instrument, right? So all that in that chest of drawers is under one note number.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so in the case of MIDI, MIDI snare note is usually number 38, and that's usually what they call a center hit. And I believe 39 is what's called the rim shot, which is, pretty much at the bottom of the stroke. This instrument here, or this controller, allows me to stack underneath. Like I can add MIDI note numbers underneath each other to where I actually hit multiple MIDI note numbers depending on how hard I hit it. So I can have a middle sound up to a certain point, and then when I hit it the hardest, I get MIDI note number 39. It's a little more complicated, but in basic form. So basically what's happening is it recognizes what note number I'm hitting when I hit this snare drum. And then according to the velocity or how hard I hit it, it pulls out the right drawer in my computer and spits that sound out through the sound system. Now there's another little chain of things that get it to the computer, but everything, as you can probably tell, is pretty instantaneous. Anyway, and then cymbals too, which are really hard to duplicate. So you don't get a clank, 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 like you don't get a ting, 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 like when you're playing soft. And it fully rings out just like a real world cymbal does. And the other thing about this is I've chosen not to play it with foot controllers. Some people do, but I'm wireless on top of that. So there's like a wireless transmitter that transmits wireless MIDI information to a wireless MIDI receiver, which then goes into a digital audio MIDI interface, which then via USB goes to my laptop. The laptop hears and sees all that stuff, and then goes back through the USB interface, and from there goes audio out into my mixing board, and from my mixing board into my amplified speaker. And that's as basic as I can express it without getting into too much technical jargon.
Just the fact that the technology exists where you can the sound on that instrument is totally dependent by how hard your fingers strike a certain what do they call that, cap?
Trigger.
It's just it's kind of a modern marvel, if you will. It's pretty awesome.
Well, it's the same technology that's existed pretty much since, I don't know who the first people were to really, put it out there, but Roland back in about 1985 came out with a TD5 drum kit, which was the rubber pads and their little TD5 brain, which is, to me, it's still a respectable brain. It's got a lot of what I call believable sounds, ones that in a pinch, you could use in a context of music, because at the end of the day, you're not really like soloing it where somebody can really say, oh, that doesn't, that sounds old school. Well, I mean, we still have TR 808s and 707s and 909s or whatever those numbers are, the cool stuff. And they're still putting that into modern brains so you can have access to that, right? So technology really doesn't get like old in that sense. It becomes vintage. But the sensors that are underneath those rubber pads are the exact same stuff as what's underneath here. So the technology in that really hasn't changed. Now, Roland in recent renditions has added what they call digital drums, and I don't even honestly know how they work, but it's just next level stuff. And it, of course, they got to stay in the business and they got to stay out and ahead and have reasons for you to spend $8,000-9,000,
right?
For a big drum kit. And when you can really have it with these little, I don't know if you can see this, but this is a trigger that triggers both edge. You can't really tell the sound of the natural drum from the, but there's a tom sound coming out from that as well. And here my snare with these snares off. Okay, so that's all electronic. That's an electronic rim shot. So these are dual zone triggers. So their kits that are $8,000, $9,000, $10,000, they give you now what looks like real drums. They have their technology in there. Yeah, they're probably better than the old school way of hooking up triggers to real drums, because you've got to kind of struggle with them to keep them from double triggering or not picking up the sound that you want. And so like you're looking for a roar and you get a meow. That's pretty disappointing.
Yeah.
And so but I've worked with this stuff long enough to where I can incorporate it. Like I've got a trigger hooked up to my bass pedal, which gives me pretty much any sound I want on a kick drum. Let's go with. See, that's one of those old school.
Oh, I love it.
Anyway,
That's
so I can do the
awesome.
same thing with this, and my computer I have a library from a specific company, and I'll give you a shout out too. It's Addictive Drums, and their Addictive Drums 2 series. I bought the whole library from a gentleman who sold it with license and everything for pennies on the dollar, and I have an infinite amount of kits on there, the world's best recorded drum kit, so I can go from James Brown sound to John Bonham at the click of a button, and have the big 26-inch kick drum and sound like When the Levee Breaks if I wanted to on this, or on this for that matter. And I'm just starting to incorporate the electronics into this because this is kind of a small portable kit. This rack folds up where most of the stuff except cymbals and drums stay on the rack, and I can carry it like under one arm literally, and then all I got to do is hang the cymbals on, open it up at the gig, hang the cymbals on there, and hang my toms on there, and I'm pretty much playing except for the hi-hat and the seat. So I work really hard at trying to be simple, and I'll work sometimes, I'll throw a day and a half into redesigning something so I can shave 2 minutes off my drum setup time when I'm hauling the acoustic kit. So let's see when that pays off. I think it'll pay off in 35.
And when we got here and I was starting to set up, that you were playing like a musical loop behind that allowed you to sort of play along with like music and then also at the drums at the same time, which I thought was amazing. Are those pre-recorded like lyrics or not lyrics, but like melodies, or is that something that you've come up with yourself?
Well, okay, so again, back to when I first started, there was the MIDI tracks. You could pretty much get anything MIDI, and with MIDI, it's easy to remove. Like if you've got a good program that can handle a MIDI file and break it out into individual tracks, it's easy to get rid of drums or percussion or whatever you want to cover on your instrument. So that's what I worked with at first. And then I started going, well, hey, I'm betting there are people, in recording studios that have tracks that they've recorded in their archives from bands that are now defunct. They're not even around anymore. Hey, would they be missing that? Hey, is there any possibility if I paid you, $50 or $100, you could pull out those tracks, take off the drums and give it to me as a play along, because then I have something more realistic. And that was, again, before all the products, because these days the market is flooded with, and it's great. It's just great. It makes a lot of little guys into great musicians quick because they get to play with the real deal, right? So I called around, and one of them, a friend of mine, Drew Youngs, who's down in California. Hey, Drew. He said, yeah, I got this album I recorded, some years ago. And this was already like 20-something years ago that I talked to him like that. And he goes, yeah, you can use it as a play along, but just don't, re-record it and then try to sell it. And I said, I'm not going to do that, right? And so he originally meant to record this album, which I believe is bass and a guitar and maybe a rhythm guitar, I forget, and vocal scats. And he eventually just recently redid that album with, of all people, Narada Michael Walden, some unknown figure in the world.
Right.
And anyway, so he let me play to this album. If you'd like, I can play a quick little excerpt from it.
Sure.
Is that something that you'd
Absolutely.
be up for? Or is this, am I still...
No, you're good.
Okay. Anyway, this tune, I've used this for a long time. It's called Double Espresso. It's a little upbeat thing that Drew wrote on his whole album called Tres Conmigo. Look him up. Tres Conmigo. Double Espresso.
Okay, that's awesome.
Not my best performance ever, but I'll let it stick.
Oh, whatever. So one of the things I always ask musicians when I have the opportunity is about the muse, because I always feel like the muse is sort of like a living, breathing thing, and even when you're talking about doing what you just did, requires a visit from the muse along the way.
The muse?
Yeah, so like the inspiration to come up with the right kind of notes, the right kind of percussion, putting the beat there, the cymbal here. So like when ideas come to you, like, oh, that would be a cool beat, or that would be a cool like riff or something along those lines, like how do you capture that as it comes to you?
Boy, I don't know if that's an easy question to answer. A lot of it depends on your vocabulary, your grasp of different musical styles and what they require. And just using, Latin style as an example, just trust me on this one. I am not a music expert. I'm not a theory expert by far on any of the above subjects. And I know that certain Latin music, they have a thing called the clave, and the clave is basically a rhythm that is sort of the rock on which the whole thing, the rest of the music is built on. And so they have like a 3-2 clave, which means there's 3 beats in one measure and 2 in the other. And where those beats are located on each of the measures, a lot of times, and that can be reversed, 2-3 clave or 3-2 clave. And a lot of times where those specific beats for that style of music are located is basically the anchor for everybody else. And if you do that wrong, you're basically committing, some big sin in music. With rock, you know what? I think it gets a little looser because rock can have jazz influence. You hear Bonham swing.
Yeah.
You hear people shuffle, and all that comes from the blues and the jazz and all the American traditions that got developed in the early 1900s with jazz, and they all gradually morphed to what we have today. At the end of the day, it's all a fusion, and the people that got tired of jazz said, hey, let's do something a little different, and then let's play rock, or let's play some mix of something, and hence came fusion. Well, now you have so many styles that makes your head spin.
Yeah.
And all of it is legit, and all of it, of course, borrows from here and there. It's like Wimpy. Remember when Popeye and Brutus were fighting?
Yeah.
And Wimpy would just be in the middle, and he'd pull a table and a hot dog and a burger out, and he'd be having a meal while they're having it out, right? So here's jazz, and here's rock, and here's Wimpy doing the fusion. So, I don't know. I probably am overstepping my bounds even.
Oh, I don't think so at all. One of the things that I completely agree with you is that there's no such thing as bad music. It's just whether that music is appeasing to you or not. And I love with few exceptions, I love every genre of music, because if you think that there isn't an artist in every genre of music that isn't just a stone cold killer on stage, you got nothing coming.
Right.
And
Oh yeah. I mean, somebody once said this, there's good rock and there's bad rock, and there's good jazz and there's bad jazz, and there might be some good country somewhere. But again, country, I mean, there's people that slay it, in country, and there's a lot of good country in modern. I like modern country a little bit better than the old.
Same here. Yeah.
That it just doesn't do anything for me personally, which doesn't assign any negative
100%
to the music. It just doesn't do anything for me. But I'll play it, if somebody needs me to play, to kind of lay it back and play some country music, I'm more than happy to engage in that to the best of my ability and do it.
And for me, it's the more complex the song is, the more I love it. So like one of my favorite bands is always going to be Tool, just because of the time signatures that they have. But also with recently, like with Disturbed, and I did not fully appreciate the timing aspect of the drummer of Disturbed, because there's this time signature where he's ahead of the beat in the front of most of his songs, where if you're listening to it for the first time, you're like, he's offbeat. And it just sounds like he's slightly offbeat.
Now you're going to have to give us all that tune so we can check out what you're talking about.
Prayer by Disturbed.
Okay.
Because in the beginning of the song, the drummer is just slightly offbeat. And then when it gets to that sort of crescendo or that part of the song where the singer just really belts it out for that first time, he's perfectly in time with the whole band while the lead singer is belting out those notes. But then as the lead singer pulls back, he's off time again.
Okay. I'm going to have to check that out.
And it's like, wait. It took me like years to figure out, oh, wait, this is on purpose. You know, just like the first album I ever bought was Metallica Black. And I hated it the first 3 times I listened to it because I didn't understand. Like, you're supposed to have feelings of anger and agitation as you hear that music. There's something about the level and the percussion and all of the sounds that come together that sort of make you feel that raw, like, ah. But until I realized that, I was clueless because I didn't grow up in a music household. It wasn't until later in life that I discovered music, and it's forever changed my life.
Cheers, by the way.
Yeah.
So your favorite album then is?
My favorite album? That's a tough one.
One of
them. I would have to say the last one from Tool was one of my favorites. And it's back and forth between Vicarious and the other one. But, you know, surprisingly enough, my favorite album is Textbook by Lana Del Rey.
Never heard of it.
Oh, she has this jazzy blues, like perfection of a voice with a really good ensemble. And it just has this sort of relaxing, chill vibe that just like, I haven't heard anywhere else. That would be my top. How about yours?
Thank you for giving us new fodder for thought.
Yeah.
I would have to say that the likes of Billy Cobham's Spectrum, 1975 or 6, I think is when it was, maybe 70, maybe a little earlier. Tommy Bolin, Jan Hammer, Billy Cobham, and I don't know who the bass player was, but that's a great album. And then, as recommended by one of my drum students' parents way back in the day, Southern California band called the Aquarium Rescue Unit.
Oh, interesting.
And their album that I really love, it's called In a Perfect World, and it's available on YouTube as the whole album. I've never heard a more gritty, perfect for a rock vocal than this guy, and you would never guess that this guy's a white guy. Blonde on top of that, or was anyway. He might be gray by now because this was early 90s. And there's some players on there that I think have some weight in the industry, and I can't quote their names right now, but if you listen to them and check out who's on there, some of you would probably recognize some of those players, and they're obviously still around, but that's a great band, and they have sort of a great rock vibe, but they throw some Santana feel in there. The percussion, drums, and I mean, everything is stellar on this thing. And the energy is unbelievable. So check out that album.
Repeat that album one more time.
That would be the Aquarium Rescue Unit, In a Perfect World.
That's awesome. Because it sounds to me kind of like the Fantastic Negrito, who is a blues musician outside. I think he's from Louisiana. Amazing, like out of this world voice that you would never hear anywhere else. And he was, I stumbled onto his record about 3 years ago, and I keep waiting for him to get another one, but I don't know if that'll happen. You get attached to these bands and it's like up and coming, and then they like fold and they move on, and then they just
a lot of music happening in the world.
Oh, that's so heartbreaking, because it's kind of hard to break into music, you know, unless it's a passion project that you don't expect it to pay the bills. Like 90%, and I don't know if you see this too, but it seems to me like about 90% of musicians don't make enough touring to pay for themselves. They need some sort of a day job to help facilitate the music.
It's somewhat precisely why I'm not in it as a business.
Yeah.
And if it's local, I mean, I'll travel have drums will travel kind of a thing, to a certain degree. And I want to get paid, and not because, I mean, everybody can use the extra buck, but for the $100-ish bill that it typically is it worth it? Well, if you kind of divide it out by hours spent, packing, getting ready, preparing your notes, maybe even a rehearsal in there. If you're like me, I'm a sub-in drummer. I play with like 4 or 5 different situations. And so I've had to learn, all their material, at least to a certain level, and, to where I can be reasonably competent and not cause any train wrecks on the set. So, and I haven't, thank you, knock on modern materials. But, by the time you add it all up, I mean, you're basically playing for sometimes $3.37 an hour if you kind of divide your $100 bill out to what's really involved. So yes, you're incredibly correct. And, it's not new news to the music community out there that for the most part, you better have love for it, because you ain't going to make any money if you're just stitching a bunch of $100 bills together and, blowing out your gas and the process and all that. Yeah, there's, the lucky few that get to be really, really plugged in. You deserve it because you've paid your dues.
100%.
You deserve to be there.
100%.
But even there, I'm betting that for those people, it's still a struggle, because you don't have, a $500 gig lurking around every corner. So, so then you got to do what you got to do and do this, $100 gigs. And, as a drummer, that's probably the most underpaid situation. And again, that's why it's like, hey, can I do Zendrum for this? Because boom, I'm out the door.
Yeah.
And then I'm off the stage and I can be back in my own little world doing what I need to do. And not that that's part of my world. I love being on stage, and I love entertaining. I love emoting. I love, I don't know, sometimes I look at my face, I go, really? Did you make that face?
Yep, I've been there before.
Well, it's like they say about when the motorcycle doesn't start, when you try to kickstart it, because you didn't hold your mouth just right.
I love that.
The mechanic, when he turns his wrench, it's like.
I can relate to that. I was a mechanic in the military. They always had that. They always had the, for lack of a better term, the bitch bolt. Mm-hmm. That one bolt that was you needed to get done or needed to get tightened.
It's always the last one.
Always the last one.
Strips out. The head stripped off.
And you only have a 1/4 inch to work with. Mm-hmm. Been there, done that.
Well, you can extrapolate that into drum stages, into stages too. What? This is our stage,
Oh, I can only imagine. I've seen some of the stages that they have, like venues, and it's like, how do you fit 5 guys and their instruments on this stage? Mm-hmm. Like,
can I bring my Zendrum?
Right? Yeah.
I did a show the jam session last night, and I get to step off the stage and actually participate in how it sounds, so I can go out there and go, oh, I'm a little bit too loud, and I go back up and turn down my volume. What drummer gets to do that? I get to dance with my girlfriend while I'm playing a show.
That's awesome.
I've been the videographer with one hand, with the drummer with the other hand, and the audience at the same time, because I'm out on the audience floor, right? So there's just a lot of versatility with the Zendrum, as long as you don't mind commandeering the Zendrum as a topic.
Not at all. How long did it take to program that?
That's actually the least, once it's programmed, and you have to know a little bit about what you're doing with MIDI and how all that stuff works. It's called mapping.
Yeah.
And a lot of programs these days pretty much have mapping, like a generalized mapping for, say you're working with this module right here. They'll just say, oh, you have the Roland TD-15. Boom, just hit that button, and suddenly all the sounds are assigned as though you're playing this with sticks. But that still leaves this open, because I have to know, because there's not there's like a standardized assignment that they have for these from the factory.
Yeah.
But that may not work for you. Then you're just switching note numbers. Instead of this being the bass drum, you make this the bass drum. And so you program this on board with its onboard programming, and then once you lock it in, it's locked in. And there's actually 16 different layouts that this thing has available. So if one layout works good for you for this gig, you can go to another layout without having to program. It's already there. You just switch over.
That's nice. So if you have one layout that's for like band A, and then the second layout that's for band B,
exactly,
you just flip a switch and you know that it's set up.
But I can also do that on the computer end, because the programs have what's called a learn function.
Yeah.
And so if I go, well, instead of this, being the rides, the ride, the bow of the ride symbol, I want this to be the bell. I go to the bell in the programming function, and there's a little button called learn. I activate learn. I tap this once, and boom, suddenly that's the bell, because it heard what I was trying to do. And then, of course I have to save that. I save it as a different setup, save as.
That's so awesome. Because I can imagine it takes forever to sort of distinguish between your drum kit, because your drum kit may have to be tuned differently based on the band you're playing with, right?
Yeah, for the most part, I use one kit that has worked for me pretty well throughout, and every once in a while I'll change a kit piece like a cymbal. I don't want that much ting, ting, ting. I want a little more wash, and I'll change the cymbal out maybe for that show, and if I don't save it, it loads back into the ting, ting, ting cymbal.
Okay.
It loads back into the same ting.
I love it. And then as you're on stage, right, has it ever happened where you're like playing and then like you bust a hole in a snare?
On real drums, I can't remember many such instances, or any really. So no, I'm not a hard player.
Okay.
So I just saw a little article on Facebook today about, somebody said, hey, when your stick is shredded right here, and there's like frays of wood from, like hitting the edge really hard when you're doing your backbeat, eventually you chew up a stick right there. I've never been that player. In fact, I've been let go from a band because I don't hit hard enough, and I was fine with that, because I like my hearing. And let's talk about that for a second. I've never, and this is bad on me, but I've never really like been one to throw on like ear protection headphones, or throwing in earplugs like a lot of players do. And I've made it to, knock on wood, almost 67. And yeah, some of the high end has been kind of shaven down on my left side. And I think some of that comes from, because that's a pretty shrilly high thing. And then the snare, when that can get kind of loud if you're playing loud. And then if you got the bass player or the guitarist right there and their amp is on 11. So, but I feel like I can still maintain a good conversation. It's just when it gets whisper quiet, I kind of have to go, eh. So no, I've never played so hard where I've put a stick through something, maybe a head busted because it was already weak or something along those lines, but it's not because of my playing typically.
And when that happens though, I mean, do you always like bring a spare canvas? Or you just kind of
personally
on the fly?
I should, but I don't. On my bass drum, I put an extra layer of drum head on there. Usually I cut typically, not on this particular bass drum, but typically I cut a little, probably about a 5.5, 6 inch hole into the 4 or 8 o'clock position on a kick drum, where one, you can put a microphone in there, or two, and most importantly for me, if there's a pillow inside, you can manipulate the pillow or the sound dampening device to where it gets back to where you wanted it from having moved it to the gig and from the gig and whatever, because sometimes that stuff moves. This one, I don't have it, but when I do cut one of those little round discs out of there, I'll use that and spray glue it onto the batter side behind the drum, between the mallet, and the main head, and that gives it an extra layer of protection. And so if I see like something nasty is happening with my outer layer, the extra disc, then I go, I better, like lighten up. But that doesn't typically happen to me. So I've never really needed to pay attention, but I know I have extra insurance on my bass drum head. My snare drum heads are typically in good shape. And if I don't divot or dent them, I know I'm not playing too hard.
Okay.
And if I don't shred my sticks, I also know I'm not playing too hard.
I appreciate that. I've always been, and like the other thing too that I hear, and it's almost like a cliche joke, is sometimes say no cowbell or I want more cowbell. Do you know the origination of this whole controversy over the cowbell, or have you experienced it as well? Because it's one of those things that just confuses the crap out of me.
So are you asking like, where did this come from?
Yeah,
Okay.
if you know.
All right. Well, so there was a guy named, so there was a show called SNL, and we know what that is, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so back in the Christopher Walken and Will Ferrell days, and I forget some of the other characters, Mike Myers might have been in there somewhere, but they put together the Blue Oyster Cult. Yeah. Pick.
Okay.
Okay. So Chris Walken is the producer. He's behind the glass, and the band is out there, and Will Ferrell has got. And so anyway, they have this dispute about whether cowbell is needed or not. The band doesn't think so, but eventually Chris Walken walks out and goes, I got this fever, and I got to have a little more. I think I got to have a little more cowbell. And so you have to watch the clip.
I will now.
And it will make perfect sense. And I read this cute little follow-up thingy, if you want to call it that. And it's like a little poster of Christopher Walken. It says, there's been some confusion. We didn't really need any more cowbell after all. Sorry about the confusion. Because everybody uses that joke these days. We need more cowbell. And just
really
for you that really need more cowbell.
Oh my God, I really appreciate that, because for the last 2 years I've been wondering, perplexed, because it's one of those conversations that happens about once a month now that I'm in the musician circle, and now that makes
more than
sense.
once a month.
That's fair.
It's probably happening somewhere 3 times right now.
And then did you understand, like, at some point where you realized, I'm pretty good at this?
I don't, I have a hard time seeing myself as like pretty good at this, because I honestly feel like I've kind of scraped and clawed my way as this German kid who didn't know anything about drums and music before I came to this country back in '71 as a 12-year-old, and didn't start drums with that cheap snare until 13 or 14 or whatever it was, and kind of climbed in just self-taught and somewhat assisted, and I've never put in the time that it really, really takes to do what the greats are doing, but I've weaseled my way into a lot of the situations that I've, been able to enjoy and that I still currently enjoy. Really good at this, I listened to my performance a minute ago, and, yeah, that could have been a lot more polished. And there's times when right out of the gate, I can do it great. And I go, wow, I wish I would have had that on recording. And then, under pressure, but I just take myself lightly, and, hope you guys will too. And I've never been a first call drummer. But I've always just had fun with it. So, really good at it. I don't know. I'll let the judges that use me decide. And if I get hired back, I guess I'm good enough, and that's good enough for me. And somewhere along the line, as life settles a little more for this, because just for the record, I just took my first Social Security check a couple of days ago.
Congratulations,
So
hopefully.
anyway, so I'm just kind of settling into the semi-retired lane. I'm still working part-time, doing a little gig of my own, and that's not music. And I want to get to the woodshed a little bit more, and I will, but it's going to have to be when time allows, and I'm not going to put myself under pressure for it, because I enjoy many, many, many things. And instead of having like this sort of peak where like I really shine in this, I don't really shine in anything. Drumming, even my girlfriend will tell you, even relationships, I don't shine sometimes as as brightly as I could. But I get a lot of mini smiles out of so many things that it adds up to one big ass smile. And this and this and this, what we're doing now, it's all part of my world. And one of these days, will I get like better? I hope so. Do I plan on putting in some practice time where I can notice the difference myself and maybe say someday, wow, I'm pretty damn good now? I don't know, but
Well, for the record, I've heard you play a few times, and I've heard a few samplings of you on stage. You're pretty darn good.
thank you.
Like, you can tell. Like, just the musicality and the decisions that you make and the arrangements that you make, top notch.
Thank you.
Top notch. And we've been at this for well over an hour. So we'll put a pin on it.
Okay.
But before we go, what projects are you working on now that you would like people to... Do you have any gigs coming up that you want people to...
Yeah, well, tonight, for example, I'm playing with a local little superstar named Howard Comfort. He has a number of different bands that he does. He does a AC/DC tribute called Soul Reaper, and then he plays Leonard Skinner or something like that. It's a Leonard Skinner project. Sorry if I misquoted it. And then he's got a sub-vinyl jukebox. Then he does a Fleetwood Mac project that I don't know the name of. And then he does Led Zeppelin. So he has like 5 different things going. And I've never really done like an entire show with him until just like last weekend, where in a different band called Iron Stallion, where I'm just a sub-in. So I'm a sub-in for Iron Stallion band. I'm a sub-in for a band called On the Side, led by Steve Davis. I'm in a kind of a evangelical sort of, subtle hidden message Latin jazz band called Two Max and Friends. Then I'm the drummer for the house band for Thursday nights at the North End on Pearl, which is a little place in Ruston, and we play there every Thursday except for the last one of each month.
And can we pause there for a second? Because when you say a jam session, I want people to know, if you're in the Pierce County area and you're a musician, you can go there to meet other musicians, jam on stage.
Time.
It's a wonderful place for not only community building, but you get to hear some good music. So even if you're not a musician, it's still cool. I love going to the Blues Jam on Monday nights in Portland when I'm not doing a podcast. So I just want to plead to people listening out there. Like, if you have a chance to check out something like a jam like this, you should go. Mm-hmm. It is a very cool experience. So I just wanted to highlight that, because I love jam sessions. They're one of the most favorite things for me to go to. And every once in a while, they convince me to get on stage, but it's hard. Yeah. So sorry. Every Thursday in the Pearl, right?
Yep. And then Wednesdays, Dawson's. There will never be a disappointment for you at Dawson's. I mean, there are just stellar musicians that show up there all the time. Last Wednesday, I got to play with a gal named Ronnie Lee, who's been on world stages, and she and the bass player Lynn Sorensen, who I get to work with on Thursday nights, they write music together. They do, big time shows. They anyway, there's a lot of great talent that shows up, and there's just never a dull moment at Dawson's. And, then we have Billy Shue here that jams on Sunday evenings. We have Conrad Reel on drums, who's Conrad Unreal. Hi, Conrad. And let's see, Thursday nights, Bill Barner and his little band. Man, there's just too many to name around here, and I'm sorry if I missed your names for what to go and see. There's the Spar around here.
Oh yeah.
That has a lot of good stuff going on.
God, I haven't been there in years.
So yeah, we have it. We're blessed.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm located right here, right now. Oh, that's your saying, Timmer. Right here, right now. I'm only like 10, 15 minutes away from just about anything around here, which is really cool.
And then what advice would you give to people who are interested in becoming a drummer?
Well, just stay with it consistently if you can. It just depends on what level of drumming that you feel like you want to get into. Find somebody who's got a good reputation for lessons, and just do your homework, really. Give it the time that it takes, and then as quickly as possible get into the real thing, get into real music. Do the play along tracks, because that's how I used to teach. I'd give them play along tracks. I'd find songs they like, and if there was a play along version available, I'd download it for them, give it to them on an MP3, and they could strap on their headphones and go to town. And then we'd work on segments at a time. So I didn't do the typical teaching approach when I taught, but I taught what I thought was musical approach, and just because that's what I know better than the theory and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway, just, nickels at a time in your piggy bank, and next thing you know, you look back and you've got a piggy bank full and it's bursting open and it's ready to cash in on a stage. So. And
what's the best way to go out and audition? Like, do you recommend still like Craigslist? Do you recommend going to jam sessions?
Jam sessions is yes, Craigslist, yes, ads. You got to know what you're able to offer to put a Craigslist or, an ad out there of any kind. And, but you'll never know what you're going to get. And anyway, just interact, mesh with other people, get to know people, get on stage as much as you can as a jammer, if that's how you want to get in, and just see how it feels. And then people will seek you out. They'll go, hey, I've got a project, you sound great. Would you be interested in being involved?
I appreciate that so much. And I'll close the podcast like I always do, people. We are all part of the same planet. We have to be kind to one another. We rely on each other for so much. So be kind. Al, thank you so much. It has been a pleasure.
And as awesome, Jeff Call says, and don't take no shit from anybody.
100%. I love that. Thank you so much.